Hello, welcome to the first episode of Human Rights and Human Wrongs. I'm here with Dr. Stephen D. Roper, the Executive Director of Peace, Justice, and Human Rights. We're here today. So, what made you interested in the issues of social justice and human rights?
So when I began working on my dissertation was after the Berlin Wall had just come down, the Soviet Union had just disintegrated, and a number of countries were going about the process of moving from totalitarianism, communist regimes, to democracy. And so I had an opportunity to work with different governments and think through in countries that you have diverse religions, diverse languages, diverse ethnic groups, how do you fashion constitutions to protect minority rights? So I began to really think through, how do you structure government, constitution, systems of laws to generally protect the rights of individuals.
Okay. Tell us more about your specific interests in human rights and experiences you have had.
So when I began, my early work was in Southern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, and the former Soviet Union, Moldova, and Ukraine. And there was, again, a lot of discussion about how do we protect different types of ethnic groups, linguistic groups. And most of my work focused on, again, constitution making and other sorts of ways you structure systems of governments so that you don't have conflict. In mid-2000s, I was in Bosnia and spent a fair amount of time in Sarajevo and in Srebrenica, where, of course, one of the worst of the tragedies in the Balkan Wars occurred. And I began to really think through the dynamics involved in how do you heal societies that have gone through these sorts of terrible human rights abuses, where you've actually had neighbor kill neighbor, you've had whole families that have been eliminated, you've had schools that were targeted, libraries that were targeted to erase culture. So that was for me a real epiphany, and I started to really think through what are the different ways that you can go about trying to heal the wounds of these sorts of terrible human rights violations. So that work focused a lot on war crimes tribunals, and there's a lot of really interesting innovation in international law in the late 1990s and the 2000s. And that work then took me from the former Yugoslavia to Cambodia to Rwanda to Indonesia. So I've been able to kind of look at this issue of human rights from a much more of a global perspective. And my latest research project is looking at, again, this notion of how do you heal wounds, but in the context of the peace plan for Colombia. So I'll be going to Colombia, I'll be going to Bogota within the next couple of months to have a dialogue with interlocutors there about their peace process and how do you overcome a 60-year civil war and actually build and rebuild a country.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. You recently came from Florida Atlantic University to San Francisco State University. Why did you decide to come to FAU?
So the position here at FAU in Peace, Justice, and Human Rights, it's a new position. It's a new organization here at FAU, and that was a real interest, was the opportunity to be part of essentially a startup. I was actually living in the heart of Silicon Valley. The new Apple building was a mile from my home.
Oh, wow.
And everyone on the street that I lived in either worked for Apple, Facebook, or was some form of a software engineer. So you were in the middle of a really interesting sort of a startup mentality in that area. And I'd worked in two other educational startups. I'd worked in Kazakhstan and I'd worked in Qatar, and both university startups. So I thought the opportunity to be part of a startup that was focused on issues related to human rights, to social justice, and to issues of peace and maintenance of peace was very appealing. The initiative, again, is something that's part of this bigger plan of President Kelly's, and so I think the opportunity to engage the entire university, not just one particular college or particular major, was very, very interesting.
Okay. Tell us about Peace, Justice, and Human Rights Initiative.
The Peace, Justice, and Human Rights Initiative, or PJHR, came out of a peace studies program that FAU's had since the late 1990s. So the university's always had a pretty profound commitment to issues of peace and human rights and social justice. And that program, this peace studies program, created a concentration in a certificate program in peace and peace studies. And that was all within the College of Arts and Letters. Again, the president's vision was that we would have these pillars that kind of anchored our future research and our teaching, and those pillars are in areas such as healthy aging, the environment, and then you'd have platforms, if you will, that were kind of like almost floors of a house that then would unite these various pillars. And so the initiative is one of those pillars. So we are university-wide. I am housed now in the provost office. Peace, Justice, Human Rights is part of the provost office in order that we can have conversations with every college, every faculty member, every staff member, and of course every student, no matter what their major is. We're located on all three campuses, so we have a associate director on the Jupiter campus, Dr. Doug McGetchen, who's in the Department of History, and we just are now establishing an office in Davie.
Okay.
So the initiative, so when I came in, I've been here a grand total of 10 months here at FAU. I came in and it was, again, a startup in every sense of the word. We had to get the office, had to hire people. And since then, what we've been doing is going about kind of creating the structure of what this is going to look like for the university. So we have 56 affiliates. These are essentially faculty members and staff members from all over the university who are interested either because of their research, their teaching, or their community outreach and social activism in issues of peace, justice, and human rights. And so we work with those faculty members to promote the research in these issues, to again think more about our certificate program, as well as to engage in programming. And we one of our missions in PJHR is to take all the different bits and pieces that are at FAU that relate to these issues and to put them into kind of one-stop shopping, to create kind of one place where students or faculty can go if they have interest in these issues. So recently, the Center for Holocaust and Human Rights Education, which had been previously in the College of Education, became part of us as well, so that we're able to do outreach to in-service K through 12 teachers to promote tolerance and understanding of human rights abuses that either came from the Holocaust or more generally from any of the genocides of the 20th century. So we have a fairly large mandate. When you deal with peace, justice, and human rights, almost you touch everything under the sun. So one of our goals over the next couple of years is to think through where does FAU and where does PJHR have maximum leverage. And what we want to ultimately do is be focusing on issues that are relevant to our local community and impact the kind of global agenda as well.
Awesome. How can FAU students select a concentration in peace, justice, and human rights?
So this concentration certificate program that we have, again, came out of the Peace Studies program. And for students who are interested in issues related to peace, justice, and human rights, they can elect the certificate, which is essentially, if you will, it's like a minor, where you can take courses that you're taking already part of a major, part of a minor, or another type of degree program, and you can apply some of those courses to this certificate so that you can kind of more profoundly study the issues related to peace, justice, and human rights. You can then with the certificate program, again, try to assemble maybe some of your elective courses so that they complement these particular types of issues. So that our goal is not to increase the length of time students stay at the university, but our goal is to help guide students to say these are maybe courses that you might want to take in tandem with each other in collection if you're interested in these particular issues.
Okay, so even someone who's in like a business major or a science major can do this as well?
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And in fact, you know, if you think about issues related to ethics, for instance, and if you think about like corporate responsibility, it would be appropriate for business students, science students as well. A number of our courses relate to issues on the environment. There's bioethics, you know, the whole issue of cloning, for example, and the ethics of cloning. And even those like yourself who are getting majors, let's say, in broadly defining communications to talk about, again, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the responsibilities of individuals who work on those areas, as well as, again, I know you are getting your major in multimedia and the whole issue surrounding, for instance, let's say the internet as a basic form of human right, which the United Nations has now declared that internet access is a fundamental human right. Okay, how do we actually provide access to people in lesser developed countries? And if it is a human right, then what does that mean in terms of issues of privacy, issues of security, all this discussion of fake news that's going on around today? What is news, what is not news, what are facts, what are truths? So I think for any student who is interested in just some of these foundational issues about kind of the morality of their obligation and our obligation within society, it's an appropriate concentration certificate.
Okay. How can students get involved with peace, justice, and human rights?
So one way we just talked about is to elect the certificate, and that is again a way I think that helps students to kind of connect the dots and close the circle on some of the issues that they may hear in different classes. That's one method. We also have internship possibilities as well. So we've had a number of students over the course of this year that have interned for us, and the internships have given students an opportunity to work with people within the community. So it's a nice opportunity for them to develop professional skills as they're kind of working and interacting with individuals within the community. It gives them opportunity to work with faculty members because again, we have 56 affiliates and we run a number of different meetings with faculty members. As well as down the road, we're hoping to really partner with liaison with government organizations. So I think that there's always the internship possibility. And finally, I think we're hoping to increase our cooperation, collaboration with student organizations, because as you know, there's a number of student organizations on campus that are devoted to issues of social justice, ranging from Black Lives Matter to LGBTQ to immigration. There's a lot of student organizations that are here on campus, and we would hope that those student organizations and those students then would come to us so that we could partner with them and think about collaborative programming so that we are relevant to FAU students as we're considering where our agenda is going to be for the next 2 years. Okay.
And lastly, can a student make a career in peace, justice, and human rights?
So ultimately, for every student, no matter what their major, the big picture question is, what can I do with my degree when I graduate? And I think that that is an important consideration for any student as they're choosing a major, and particularly as they're thinking of adding a minor, a double major, or a certificate program. And what's been, I think, very interesting to me over the last 25 years, I work primarily internationally, but again have worked with a number of organizations in the United States, but certainly internationally there's a lot of very interesting work for students who are interested in issues of peace, justice, and human rights, and it can take them in lots of different places in terms of their career paths, as well as lots of different locations as well. So you see that there are government organizations that really require that individuals have a very basic fundamental understanding of human rights law, that they understand the role of civil society in the promotion of human rights and the issues involved in human rights. So I think if you wanted to work for the government, whether again it's for the U.S. State Department, for Agency for International Development, or intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations, it definitely helps you, I think, in terms of giving you an understanding of the issues that these organizations deal with day in and day out. There's also a lot of work to do that is involved with what we call nonprofits in the United States. We call them non-governmental organizations overseas. So for instance, in journalism, there's a lot. I know that when I was working in Russia and Ukraine in the mid and late 1990s, there was a large discussion about how do you professionalize journalists and how do you teach, for instance, the ethics of journalism, not just the production, but ultimately when you've created content, is it appropriate content? How do you disseminate it? So I think that there's a lot of work to be done even for the non-governmentals. For nonprofit purposes, for students who would want to stay here in Florida, if you think about almost every large global problem that we could talk about, the environment, human trafficking, conflict, immigration, the rights of LGBTQ, racial inequalities, all those issues play out here in Florida.
Absolutely.
Especially in South Florida. So I think for a student who would want to get involved and think about working here in the South Florida area or anywhere in Florida, there would be any number of different career paths that they could be following here, both for government work as well as working for the nonprofit sector. So I think ultimately by getting a certificate in peace, justice, and human rights, and just more profoundly understanding human rights, I think it opens a lot of very interesting doors for students at FAU.
Okay. Is there anything last things you'd like to say?
I think that this is again a new initiative, and as a startup, students can be very involved in what shape and what form it's going to ultimately take, and I think. For many of us, if we're going to be thinking about issues about how we can change our country, how we can change kind of the global agenda, first and foremost, we should change the environment at FAU. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for students to get involved in student affairs and partner with us so that we can make FAU, I think, kind of a place that is very inclusive and that kind of promotes the tolerance that we would want to see in general society as well. So I would hope students would get involved just to make, if anything, FAU, I think, a much better place to learn and ultimately to make your kind of lifelong relationships.
This is the first episode of Human Rights and Human Wrongs. Stay tuned for more episodes coming.